a Times Union podcast.
Previously on Long Buried.
This was an interesting scene in that the person was buried and it was under concrete. That's not typical.
State police pursued several theories to try and identify the human remains found in Paterson, New York. Most were dead ends. Then, a miraculous phone call.
He just simply said, "Hey, have you guys looked into Karen Ramsey yet?"
There was no missing person report for Karen Ramsey. No record of any official investigation into her disappearance. But police soon discovered no one had seen her since 1980. They also found out Karen Ramsey had a daughter. That forced State Police investigator Joe Morrissey to make a tough decision.
This is a very weird phone call, to call somebody and say, "Hey, I think I might have found your mom. Can I come and get a DNA sample from you?" There's no easy way to make that phone call.
Morrissey got his positive DNA sample. It was from Jen Ramsey, a 40-something who was only 2 years old when her mother vanished. Jen had grown up believing she left to start a new life. Jen's DNA confirmed the human remains found in Paterson were her birth mother's, 25-year-old Karen Ramsey. Karen's husband, John Ramsey, claimed that she had left him. She'd done it before, he said, and apparently few people questioned it. So, how had Karen Ramsey ended up buried in concrete in the woods? I'm Phillip Pantuso. You're listening to Long Buried, an investigative podcast from the Times Union. This is episode 3, A Regular Peyton Place. Before we begin, a word of caution. This episode contains references to domestic violence. Please take care as you listen. I'm an editor for the Times Union. I oversee the newspaper's Hudson Valley coverage, local government reporting, breaking news, investigations, but also features on arts, culture, and the outdoors. Most days, that job involves a lot of editing, a few meetings, and hours spent making coverage plans that are usually thwarted by something unexpected happening. Something like the discovery of a body. I was at a diner in Kingston when I first heard about the Karen Ramsey case. I had no idea, as I poked at my huevos rancheros, what I was about to get into. I got an email. It was from the New York State Police. They sent a 66-word press release. Here was one of our Times Union staffers reading it.
Update, June 6th, 2024. Investigators have confirmed that the remains found are that of 25-year-old Karen Ramsey, maiden name Angelillo. Ramsey was a local resident of the town of Southeast and has not been seen or heard from since May of 1980. Anyone with any possible information is asked to please contact the New York State Police in Brewster.
I receive dozens of news releases every day. Few have piqued my curiosity like this one did. Not seen or heard from since May of 1980. Yet it had taken almost 2 months to identify the remains? I called a state police source who told me there was no missing person report anywhere for this Karen Ramsey. It all seemed so unusual. I wanted to find out more. And I became a little bit obsessed in my attempts to do just that. I spent every spare moment of my workday and a lot of time on weekends on a quest to find out as much as I could about Karen Angelillo Ramsey and about her husband, John. I began by combing the internet for information. Right away, I found something noteworthy, an obituary for a man named John M. Ramsey. He had died in December 2022 in Dutchess County, just 15 miles from where Karen Ramsey's remains were found. I wasn't sure if this was the John Ramsey I was looking for, but there was one big clue that it might be. Among his survivors, a daughter named Jennifer. Remember in the last episode, we learned that a woman named Jen Ramsey provided the DNA sample that allowed police to conclusively identify the remains. Also, this obituary said John Ramsey was born February 9th, 1949. That means he would have been 30 or 31 years old when Karen Ramsey went missing. The timeline fit. According to the obit, this John Ramsey was an avid outdoorsman. He loved hiking, canoeing, camping, skiing, and riding motorcycles and dirt bikes. He was married with 2 daughters. The obituary also said that the Ramsey family enjoyed, quote, many great trips together. There was a carousel of photos at the top. In those photos, John Ramsey is giving serious dad energy. He has short brown hair that was receding by his mid-30s. Listener, I can relate. He's often wearing some kind of headwear, a baseball cap, a bucket hat, a balloon animal. He sports a thick, gray, Teddy Roosevelt-style mustache. He has a warm, slightly impish smile. His eyes are soft and kind, slightly hooded. In one photo, he's leaning against a motorcycle on the side of a road at the top of a mountain. He's next to a friend that also rode up there. In another, he's got on a Harley-Davidson t-shirt, aviator sunglasses, and an American flag draped over his shoulders. He's drinking what looks like a margarita in a tall glass with a koozie. His daughters are in a couple of these photos, aging decades as one image dissolves into the next. But there's one constant. They're always smiling. The obituary also said that John Ramsey served in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. One of the photos shows him as a young man dressed in military fatigues, standing in a jungle, cradling a high-powered sniper rifle. After the Army, the obit says, John Ramsey spent decades working in the insurance industry. He retired in 2015. There was no mention of Karen Ramsey. The only spouse named in the obituary was a woman named Elaine Calvano Ramsey. They married in 1981, 1 year after Karen Ramsey disappeared. John had worked at the Fireman's Fund Insurance Company in White Plains. It turns out Karen Angelillo had once worked there too.
I was just a clerical worker in the unit that handled business insurance.
That's Patricia Racino Sanzo. She worked at Fireman's Fund at the same time that both John and Karen did in the mid-1970s.
And I'm not even sure what department she was in because we were on opposite ends of the company. You know, we didn't really see each other in passing regularly.
Patricia went to the same parochial school Karen attended as a young girl in Westchester County. They weren't best friends, but they'd known each other. They'd gone their separate ways after school, but crossed paths years later working at the Fireman's Fund. Patricia didn't interact much with Karen or John at the office, but she does have one vivid memory of them together.
For some reason, this memory just sticks in my head that John and her were kind of together as an item, and I didn't know him at all, but he seemed very like he wanted her to be with him and not kind of interact with other people. And I think all she wanted to do was like play volleyball or some silly, baseball or something.
What was giving you that impression?
It's weird that this sticks in my head, but it was just like it didn't feel good. The way he approached her, it didn't feel good.
By this point, I was confident that the John Ramsey in the obituary I'd found online was the one who had been married to Karen Ramsey. One thing I forgot to mention. I actually found this obituary on the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. It had been deleted. I talked to the director at the Dutchess County funeral home that held John Ramsey's service. She told me a family member recently asked them to take it down. My next step was to find out more about John and Karen's lives. John was easier to track. I pored over public databases for documents. I pulled out property records, court cases, that sort of thing. As far as I could tell, John Ramsey had never been convicted of a crime. He had a professional license as an insurance adjuster. It was last renewed in 2009. And it appeared that he had lived in Stormville, a hamlet in Dutchess County, from 1988 until his death. He was 73 years old. The obituary did not mention a cause of death. But what about the years before that? Public records weren't much help there, and they weren't very helpful for tracing Karen either. Around this time, I got a tip from state police. When Karen Ramsey was killed, she had been living in a condo in the town of Southeast. That's one town over from Patterson, where her remains were found more than 4 decades later. So I began searching for those property records. Now, a quick note. These next few minutes are going to include some dense descriptions of procedure and paperwork. Not the most riveting podcast content. Even though I've been obsessed with this case, believe me when I say I wish this part of the reporting had had a little more action. But it's vitally important to the story we're telling, so bear with me because it will all make sense soon. In my quest to find where John and Karen Ramsey had lived, I had the street name, Holly Stream Court, and the knowledge that they would have purchased the condo sometime in the mid to late 1970s. In New York, the best place to look for property records is at the county clerk's office. Some counties have digitized those records, so that's where I started. But I soon found that Putnam County's online database of property records only had transactions back to the 1980s. So I called the county clerk. She didn't have any more information than what I'd already found, but she told me something that led to a breakthrough. Some municipalities in the county maintain their own property records databases. The town of Southeast was one of them. So I went to the town of Southeast's property records database, searched Holly Stream Court, and got a list of 85 properties with a Holly Stream Court address and an individual tax ID with the county. As I clicked through the records for each parcel, I found that this database had something the county database did not have: the historic property record card for every address. I know I just said this part wasn't super exciting, but when you're falling down a research rabbit hole, anything that opens up a new pathway is thrilling. In that moment, I felt like Robert Redford's character in All the President's Men, following the money. Thank you to the unknown clerk, whoever you are, who years ago scanned in these historic property records cards. You've changed the world, at least for this case. These historic property record cards were 2-sided files. Each was about the size of a 3x5 index card, and they contained a ton of information about each property. When it was built, what materials were used during construction, what the annual assessments were, what type of heating, wiring, plumbing, and roofing each property had. And each one had a handwritten list of all the transactions, with the buyer's signatures and the date of the sale. I began reading through the property records for every Holly Stream Court address, all 85 of them. This part wasn't as thrilling as the discovery of their existence. In fact, it was pretty monotonous. After a few hours, jackpot. I found that on October 27th, 1977, John and Karen Ramsey bought Unit 1C1 at the Holly Stream condominium complex. It was brand new, built just the year prior. They spent $44,000 on it, which is about $235,000 today. Once I knew John and Karen's address, I could find out who lived near them, people who might have known Karen personally, people who could give us a better idea of who she was and what might have happened to her. Hopefully, there were still some neighbors alive. The Holly Stream condominium complex has 21 buildings, each with 4 units. I pulled up the property record cards for the units near John and Karen's. The 50-year-old handwriting was really hard to decipher. Long story short, eventually I found the names Ed and Jeanie White. They were John and Karen's neighbors, and, it turns out, best friends at Holly Stream. Ed was a cop with the New Rochelle Police Department. He died years ago. But Jeanie is still alive. She remarried after divorcing Ed in the 1980s. She now uses a different last name, which she asked us not to use on the podcast. My producer Jessica and I went to see her in the spring of 2025. She lives alone in a 2-bedroom condo on the ground floor of a sprawling suburban complex just off the main drag in Fishkill, New York. We sat around the table in her little kitchenette and talked for a couple of hours, the dishwasher rumbling in the background.
Do you mind if I use your puzzle boxes to...
Sure. They're
I
perfect.
should've-
The perfect
I
size.
should have moved them. I need another puzzle.
Jeanie says her life with Ed was difficult. He was violent at home. I was quickly learning that male violence toward women was becoming an unfortunate theme of this podcast. Jeanie left Ed once, years before they divorced. But they got back together, and she got pregnant with their second child. They'd been living in a tiny apartment in New Rochelle, a city just a few miles north of New York City in Westchester County. They needed a bigger place. Westchester County was too expensive, though, so they began to look a little further north.
He just heard from somebody on the job about this town called Brewster.
Brewster, then and now, is a picture postcard of a village in Putnam County, about 40 miles north of New Rochelle. It's a little quieter and a lot more affordable than the upscale suburbs of Westchester County in Connecticut. Stately Victorians and old colonials line shaded streets in Brewster. An abundance of rail trails and equestrian paths attract outdoorsy types. So does the small Crater Lake in the middle of town, with its sandy beach that's only open to town residents and their guests. Main Street is lined with mom-and-pop shops and quaint eateries. There's a Tudor-style train station, the penultimate stop on the Metro North's Harlem line. It's always been a popular commuter town. It's easy to see how a young couple with a growing family would want to live here. Ed took Jeanie to see it. She was sold. On April 3rd, 1978, they signed a mortgage for a 2-bedroom condo at Holly Stream Court. It cost $36,000.
It was beautiful. It was all new, and but we didn't know anybody who lived there.
But soon, that would change. Jeanie would meet another young mother in a difficult marriage who, for a short time, became her closest friend. She would also meet a lover, who just happened to be that close friend's husband. We'll be right back.
In July of 1908, America was transfixed by the murder of a young woman in upstate New York.
Either Hazel came down here alive or dead. We don't know.
Oh,
I think she was alive.
She was found floating in a country pond, her death shrouded in mystery, her killer unknown. Was she murdered by a spurned lover? Was she leading a secret double life outside of her station as a governess to the wealthy residents of Troy, New York? Did she know too many secrets?
She was obviously trying to create a better life for herself, and she knew how to maneuver to make it work for her, and it worked until it didn't.
In this new limited series podcast from the Times Union, we'll go back in time to an era of wealth and prosperity, of rampant political corruption, and of secrets and lies in upstate New York. We'll unravel the mystery of the life and death of one young woman, and why her story still resonates more than a century later.
'tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone.
Listen to The Girl in the Pond at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are faded and gone, no flower.
You're listening to Long Buried. The condos on Holly Stream Court had been built a couple years earlier to meet the growing market of young, middle-class couples buying their first homes. The complex had a pool, a playground, and a clubhouse for socializing. It still does. Jeanie and Ed were like a lot of people who live there.
You know, it really was nice. And there were lots of kids. That was the good part.
Was it mostly young couples?
Yeah, it was mostly young couples with young children. If I had been there with somebody else, it probably would have been a lovely life.
Whatever hope Jeanie had of patching things up with Ed died pretty quickly. Their marriage did not get better in Brewster. Jeanie felt isolated.
But I think when I went up there, it was kind of, even then, with the intention of, I can't wait to get out, like get back. Because I was afraid. I said, if something happens, I have nobody up here.
Jeanie White needed a friend. It didn't take long for her to meet Karen Ramsey.
One day I was at the pool, and she came up, and she had a little girl, Jennifer.
Jeanie and Karen got to talking. They realized they lived just across the quad from each other, and their toddlers were the same age. They started hanging out, sometimes daily.
Karen and I became good friends. You know, we'd go to the pool together. Sometimes we'd go food shopping together. The time I spent with her, I found her to be just, she was a wonderful person. You know, she was fun, and she was very quirky. And John and Eddie didn't have a lot in common, but they eventually kind of, hit it off, I guess.
John and Karen started coming to barbecues that Jeanie and Ed, the proud owner of a new grill, hosted. Jennifer Ramsey, then just a toddler, would sometimes come to these barbecues. She would play with Jeanie's son. Jeanie, John, and Karen had another thing in common. They all loved riding dirt bikes. Jeanie had gotten into them with a friend when she was a teenager. John had turned Karen onto it.
John and Karen were avid dirt bikers. And so he said to me, hey, if you ever want to go. And so I did. I laugh now when I think about it, because I think where we went was where they found her.
Like Jeanie and Ed, Karen and John also had a tough marriage. Jeanie says she recognized something of herself in Karen, a woman who felt trapped by circumstance in a life she hadn't exactly dreamed of.
They didn't have a great relationship. I know Karen was a very good mother, but I don't think her plan, I think when she planned her life, I don't think she included children. She got pregnant, she had Jennifer, and she was a great mom, but I just kind of think, like, sometimes the heart wasn't in it. John came over one night with Jennifer, and I was like, where's Karen? And he said, oh, I don't know. He said, she told me she needed time, and he said she packed a little bag, and she said she was going to take a couple of days. But she came back.
It was one of several times Karen left John to find space, to clear her mind.
So she would just kind of hand him Jennifer and say, she'd either go off on her bike or she'd get in the car and she'd just say, I just need time. I just need to get away for a little while. Sometimes she'd leave in the morning and then we'd be outside sitting at the picnic table and she'd come. But it was very odd the one night that he came and he had Jennifer, because I don't ever remember him coming alone at night. It was always, during the day, or like in the morning we'd see him or something. And he said, oh, she ran away again, and he used to say she doesn't want to be a mother. Like she never wanted to be a mother. When he said that, I just kind of blew it off, like he was just blowing off steam or whatever. And then, the next morning Karen would be there. So
beneath the placid surface of this suburban idyll was an undercurrent of despair. Joe Morrissey, the state police investigator on the Ramsey case, used a somewhat dated pop culture reference when he interviewed Jeanie.
The detective was saying it was like Peyton Place.
Peyton Place. The town everyone's talking about. All the people of Peyton Place, with all their joys and sorrows, passions and compassions, are on the screen at last.
I, too, had the distinct impression that there was a lot going on beneath the surface at Holly Stream Court, much like the popular 1960s soap opera. How? Well, basically everybody was sleeping with everybody else. Here's Jeanie again.
My husband wound up having an affair with Karen. I guess it started very innocently. They met, for lunch or something one day because he wanted somebody to talk to. But anyway, after a short time, I knew they were having an affair. I could care less. I really didn't care.
She didn't care at the time because she desperately wanted out of that marriage. But almost 50 years later, the affair her husband Ed had with Karen Ramsey came back to haunt her.
So when the police came, or the sheriff, whoever it was, came and talked to me, he told me that my husband was a possible suspect.
We'll get back to that, but I want to stay in 1979 for a little bit. Jeanie had more to say about Ed and Karen's affair.
I was like, we're friends. And then after a while, it was just like, I don't care. She probably knows I don't care. At that point, I had no love for Eddie. I was kind of stuck in the marriage and dying to get out. I think maybe that's why she felt it was okay.
Jeanie says she never spoke about the affair with Karen. In fact, in a weird way, the discovery of the affair helped Jeanie.
I never told Karen I knew. And we just kept going because I really didn't care. In my mind, I said, I have one more reason to get a divorce, like to be able to get a divorce and get my children.
A short time later, Jeanie did leave Ed, this time for good. On September 4th, 1979, she moved with her 2 kids down to her parents' house in the Bronx. She remembers the exact date because it was her son's 2nd birthday. It was also Ed's birthday. Jeanie tried to leave her past behind. She never spoke to Karen again. But one day, a few weeks later, her phone rang. It was John Ramsey.
So John had called and he said, you want to get together for some coffee? He said, I'm going to be in the area. And I was like, yeah, sure. So we had coffee, and it was funny, my mother she was like, is that John, Karen and John? I said, yeah. Isn't he married? And I said, no, they're getting divorced too.
At this coffee date, Jeanie asked about Karen.
I said, what's going on with Karen? And he said, we're separated. And I don't know if he said he was gone or she was gone. I can't remember.
One coffee date became 2, then dinner. Eventually,
after a couple of months, we were a couple.
But their relationship didn't last very long. After 2 months, Jeanie got another unexpected call from John Ramsey.
He called me and he said, Jeanie, I can't see you on Friday night. And I said, okay. I wasn't it was just somebody to talk to and have dinner with. And so I said, okay. I said, can I ask why? And he said, yeah. He said, in fact, I can't see you anymore. And I said, okay. I said, did I do something? And he said, no. He said, you know Elaine. And I'm like, our neighbor Elaine? And he said, yeah. And he said, I'm in love with her.
Jeanie said this call, which came in November 1979, was the last time she spoke to John Ramsey. The last time anyone saw Karen alive was around the holidays that year. Did you ever wonder what happened with the rest of Karen's life, or did you ever get curious about it?
I did. After I hadn't seen John in a while, I thought about it, and I actually thought about reaching out to her. And I don't know, I guess I had the 2 kids, then I was working full time, I was living with my parents, and, I just think it just never happened. And, as time went by, I really didn't, sad to say, but I really didn't think of her. I guess every once in a while, maybe I'd see a picture or something that would make me think about, Holly Stream and my friends. But it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't a happy time for me. I kind of, as soon as I could put it in the background, that's what I did. And I guess Karen went with that, unfortunately.
That is until 45 years later, when State Police investigator Joe Morrissey knocked on Jeannie's front door.
And he looked right at me and he said, did you have any reason to want her dead? And I said, me? No, she was my friend. He said, wasn't she having an affair with your husband? I said, oh, yeah. I said, people must think I'm crazy. I said, yeah. I said, but I was looking for any excuse to divorce him, so it was just one more. So I said, no. I said, I would never hurt Karen.
Next time on Long Buried. Did you stay in touch with her after high school?
I did for a couple of years.
Who was Karen before John?
I was actually quite surprised that she had married because I didn't figure that she would be that outgoing.
She had a good heart. She was a really good person. And I thought John was too. I mean, I would have, had I known all of this, I probably would have said the same thing about John.
Long Buried is a Times Union podcast. This series was reported and written by me, Phillip Pantuso. It was produced and edited by Jessica Marshall. Editorial direction and fact-checking by Erica Smith and Casey Seiler. Special thanks to Nora Mashanik for voice work and George Ruiz for design. Our web editors are Daniel Roberts and Kat Simon. The theme music was composed and performed by Martin D. Fowler, with additional music by Eliseo Di Domenica, Cyrus Farah, C minor, and Kronborg via Getty Images. To see photos from Holly Stream Court, visit timesunion.com/longburied. If you have questions about this case or want to share any information you may have about it, email us at podcast@timesunion.com.